in yet. Okay, so we're officially live. Thank you for joining us for the second webinar series. My name's Abby Hunt. I'm a counselling psychologist representing Data Drives Insight today. And my guest today is Kathy McKenzie, who's a CEO and coach at FireUp Coaching. So welcome, Kathy. Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Abby. It's lovely to be here.
Today we are talking about something we're both really passionate about, which is around psychological safety. And I know we've worked together a fair bit over the last year. We only met each other about a year ago, both in the kind of coaching field, and it was great working with you and a bunch of your team members as well to look at how can we influence and raise psychological safety within the organisations that we work with. So thank you for joining me today. Let's just go straight into it. The format as we usually run these things is to talk a little bit about the topic, share some of our stories, and also open up the floor if there's any questions in the last 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how we go. We usually talk a lot in these sessions as well.
Yeah,
so see how we go. So I guess one of the things I wanted to start off with is the definition, I suppose, of psychological safety. And this is kind of taken a little bit from, in my head, Amy Edmondson's work, who's the guru of psychological safety. And, if I add a few of my own words to it, I guess when I think about psychological safety, I think about, our willingness as individuals to speak up and voice our concerns, or to share our ideas, or to own that we've messed up, or to feel safe to be ourselves and show up safely within our teams that we work with. Would you add anything differently to that, Kathy?
Look, I think it's absolutely how we connected with, because I'm so passionate about this, and it ties in beautifully with the work that I did with Judith Glazer when I did her conversational intelligence. And I was kind of looking for how do I bring that to life or use it more. And then when I met you, and her work was around, how do we make sure that people feel included? And I think that's it. It's like, the essence of it really simply is that everyone feels okay, as you said, to show up and be their authentic selves at work, and not have to have kind of a persona and a facade that goes on the minute they step in the workplace versus who they are at the rest of the time. So, and I think that diversity and inclusion is such a big piece.
Absolutely. I think, we both work in a variety of different industries, don't we? And so we come across a lot of different teams and of all different shapes and sizes. And would you say that your experience is that psychological safety is high? Is that common in the teams that you come across, or not?
Look, it's very interesting, Abby. Since you asked me the question yesterday and said, look, can you come with a really great example? And obviously people come and work with us because they've got issues to get coached around. And I think it's, it's kind of challenging at the moment because there has been so much uncertainty and so much change over the last 5 years that a lot of organisations are struggling with creating that psychologically safe workplace. And if I think back to why I sort of first got into this area of coaching and training, it's like from my nursing, from my early career as a nurse, it wasn't even factored in that time, 40, 50 years ago. No one considered psychological safety in the workplace. That's why it was a breath of fresh air when I came back and I got a job with flight centres, and everyone was asking me for my opinion. I didn't feel judged. I could actually, be myself at work. And so that was kind of the first time that I really recognised how much more of your own potential you demonstrate, and hence that's sort of led to my trajectory over the last 25 years, really.
Yeah, I suppose that the word psychological safety is not something that has been a commonly used phrase, but we're hearing it everywhere now. And I think, that has a lot to do with, things that have been happening within the world, and, people feeling safe to be themselves. And, again, I think, and research shows it's actually really normal to have low psychological safety within teams, because we're quite conditioned to bite our tongues and to not be that person that stands out, or to not make a fuss, And from the psychological point of view, I think a lot of that stems from our upbringing as well. So if our core mantras and messages growing up were to, be seen and not heard, or don't be too much, or
Yes.
if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all, or just go with the flow. And so, what we are realizing, and I suppose what you said before about your experience with Flight Centre, is you experience what it feels like when we feel we can show up as ourselves. We can be far more performing. We can perform so much better. So yeah, I suppose as you say, it's most of the people who contact us for coaching are not feeling that level of psychological safety necessarily.
And I think one of the interesting things for me, Abby, when I met you, was that I've been in this industry for a long time and I'm a master coach, but I didn't really understand the difference between psychological safety and psychosocial hazards. And I know you make that distinction far better than I do. So I think that's a really great thing to share with people.
Yeah, I think it's so true, because I often hear people using it in different terminology. And so to get that distinction really clear, psychosocial risks are those workplace environmental factors that, or hazards that if they're in place, then they will in fact impact on how safe you feel within the environment. So if there's bullying, or if there's sexual harassment, if there is the workload is just extremely high and unmanageable, and it's not managed well by an organization, then it makes it very difficult for me to stay satisfied, to speak up, to be able to, I might have even tried to speak up and it got shot down. So if we think about when those psychosocial risks are not managed well, they're going to impact greatly on psychological safety. When people don't feel safe to be themselves, then they underperform, they're more likely to leave. That's where businesses often come to me and say, our churn is high, we've got a lot more increase in stress claims, they've got a lot more conflict within the workplace. There's a lot of these pain points. And so what we like to do is to measure that and understand what's happening in each team, so we know where to start.
Yeah, and I think that's been incredibly valuable for me as a coach, is that our role is to start the conversation and to generate some reflection so that people do start to recognize that, is my view, contributing to a safe workplace or not? And how can I kind of shift that perspective, which is what coaching is all about. And I know I've found it quite profound in the debriefs I've done using the tool that you introduced me to, the psychological safety and inclusion tool, that I only got like 2 or 3 questions out, and it generated such an important conversation in the team that they hadn't been able to bring to the surface because of that artificial harmony. And I think that's where I see the real value in not just waiting until someone's complained of bullying, or waiting, which is what most people come to us with, which is why I couldn't find any really standout examples at the moment, because most people are coming to us going, help, we've got these issues going on. People are very uncivil to each other at the moment, or people are not showing respect. How do we solve that? And it's about bringing that capacity for change back into their own organisations.
Absolutely. Yeah, something that you talked about yesterday when we were doing a bit of prep together, you said, I would really love to see organizations getting ahead of the game rather than being so reactive and only, calling and reaching out when they actually, things aren't good, to be able to use this. Because, we talked about before, the ISO standard 45003, which is around, now it's a guideline saying, organizations must manage organizational and employee psychological safety and psychosocial risk. So there's a few more kind of organizations going, oh, hang on, we've got to do something. There's a compliance aspect to it. But share a bit more about what you were saying yesterday in terms of like, let's get ahead of the game.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things that is very evident at the moment, and this is partly because of COVID, so you can't really blame people. Their focus went off consistency in training and development, And we haven't really come back. We haven't come full circle. I think it's starting to happen this year. But, if you think about successful organisations have always got a really consistent approach to culture development. And yes, there's a lot of change in terms of digital transformation now, which in some ways should make it easier for us all to deliver those programs. But there's been sort of a hiatus where people stopped doing that consistent development. And now they're kind of struggling, and there's been a lot of knowledge lost out of organisations when people, there was a lot of changes in roles and organisations during COVID. So I think one of the things that we need to come back to is looking at longer term consistency, not just expecting that young people, particularly if they were impacted by, not being able to go to their year 11, 12 socials and all of that social isolation that happened during COVID. And now we get them into the workplace and expect that they're just going to be great communicators.
Yeah.
And they've got lots of anxiety, so they don't feel really safe to voice their, and maybe they don't know the appropriate ways. And so, it gets really complicated.
Absolutely. I mean, essentially, psychological safety is invisible, right? You can't see it. You can see
that's
behavior.
right.
You don't know what people are thinking. When we developed the psychological safety indicator, that was something that we wanted to understand for people. How do we make the invisible visible? And we've found a way of making that happen through a bit of AI and technology, being able to actually identify within 3 minutes what's going on within this team, and the power of the team looking at the results and going, oh wow, I'm not alone, or there's 80% of us that actually don't feel accepted for who we are. What are we going to do about that? And so it kind of normalizes it and brings some of those issues to the surface, which is really cool. And
I think sorry, go on, Abby.
No, you're on a roll. Go for it.
I was just thinking as you said that I think one of the things that we also need to equip people with is the language, to actually understand that people don't deliberately prime a conversation for threat. Like, I don't deliberately say something to you and intentionally want to upset you. I don't think many people genuinely go to work thinking that they're going to be a bully or create mischief today. And I think there needs to be some really focused attention on giving people the skills around being solution focused and priming conversations for trust. So how do I build trust with you first before I try and engage in anything else? And certainly I don't just start with telling, because if we start with telling, automatically that's likely to have someone sort of withhold or withdraw from the conversation if they don't feel like, well, I'm already being told what to do here, so what's the point of me jumping in? As you said, we're conditioned to not necessarily speak up when we should, and it's not always easy. Like, I'm very guilty of it. I had some issues a few years ago, and I found it very difficult when you're dealing with someone who's quite dominant and assertive to stand your ground, and to use that conversational intelligence and not allow someone else to trigger you into an unemotionally intelligent place, so it's really complex, and we need to consistently all keep working on it.
That's well said. I think it's psychological safety in a team is something that everyone's responsible for. So each of us, bring our own element of that into the team. So being able to identify that and talk about that's really critical. If you think about any of the kind of trends that you're seeing, or we talked a little bit about psychological safety being, somewhat, it's normal to be somewhat low. Are you seeing any I suppose a bit more of a focus or interest in the area of psychological safety specifically from your clients?
Look, and whether it's a good or a bad thing, I did have one HR manager say to me recently, look, at least now I can get the conversation happening in the boardroom, because they're all responsible for psychological safety, and there are consequences for directors and for board members if they ignore that. And she said, it's terrible that it needs to be mandated, but it's a bit like, when I was nursing, they mandate things to make sure that people do them. I mean, hand washing, we all know that hand washing keeps us all safer, but, unfortunately, it has to be mandated. So I think the trends that I'm seeing are that reluctantly some people have come along, but what's happening is that they see that even a small amount of attention to what can we make go right really starts to shift things. And I love the data that you shared with me around, I was quite shocked initially when you shared it with me that only about 3 out of 10 in a team generally feel like 100% psychologically safe. But if you can move that 3 to a 6, then the results are exponential. And I think that's what I have seen is even the first debriefs that I've started doing in the last, 6 to 12 months since I've finished my accreditation have allowed me to really open up conversations. And I think the next part of that needs to be longer term commitment by organisations to really building that trust. And at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's building trust and helping people to understand the language of trust, the behaviours that build trust, and, and what really needs to happen if there are identifiable psychosocial risks in your workplace.
I measure, so any team that I work with, whatever industry it is, I use the PSI, I use the measure. And the reason I do that, one as a coach, is because it helps me identify which areas that I can particularly work with the team on. And it also starts to build the psychological safety within their team because they're talking about whatever the red flags are. One of the bits of not contention, one of the pushbacks I often get from often HR, people who are often snowed under with so many programs and wellness programs and everything else on top of their plate. They kind of go, oh no, this is another thing I need to implement. Whereas my view of that is it's actually attaching it to something that you're already doing. So whilst you might already be doing a yearly survey, or you might actually be doing a yearly psychosocial risk audit. Those are fantastic. However, that's often too late by that point. We've already lost a bunch of people throughout the year, or we haven't been able to pinpoint specifically what's happening within each team that we could have, perhaps worked on. So I always say there's a way of actually keeping your finger on the pulse throughout the year, as opposed to it being at the end of the journey, so end of the year after it's too late. What's your views about regular? I don't want to say testing, but regular insights?
Look, I think it's actually almost, it's taking the testing out of it really, because some of the tools that we embedded in organisations 10 years ago are not keeping up with the kind of need to have that transformation happening internally in the organisation. Because, and as coaches, one of the things that we've shifted from kind of people doing coaching as kind of, I might do that as a career when I'm 60, to recognising the power of coaches internally in organisations to use a tool like the PSI that is a dynamic tool that is team driven. And it's not about an external coach coming in once a month and people go, oh, yeah, right, I'm busy now. It's about that continual improvement and having that internal capability. And I must admit, years ago, I got the opportunity with Australia Post to build a strong coaching capability, also with one of the Department of, it was then the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. But both of those organisations, when they embedded coaching into their culture and really focused on that psychological safety piece and developing their leaders' emotional intelligence, then that had just phenomenal results. And particularly for re-engaging people that perhaps have been with an organisation for a long time, I think now's kind of that opportunity to get people engaged in using different tools and the digital component of this is all part of what we need to be doing in terms of digitally upskilling people. That paper-based, long surveys are kind of, we're all operating at a very fast pace now. And I think for me, this is what's been exciting about finding this tool, because I'm accredited in lots of different tools. I'm really conscious, though, that I've got to keep up to date digitally with being able to offer clients things. AI is being used. And so we have to be able to engage with clients with tools that are current and relevant to what's going on now. Because often, something that it was very interesting. I was at the Vocational Education and Training Conference last week on the 13th and 14th of March. And, 2025, they're saying that in the last 3 years, the transformation of technology has come further than the previous 5, but even that 5 we thought was accelerated.
Yeah, wow.
Hence, if we're not using tools like the psychological safety and inclusion instrument to find out, you'll get people who are potentially like me I was Luddites and a little bit older and a little bit nervous about technology, just stepping back, and they won't feel safe to speak up and say, you know what, you need to upskill me, you need to get me. So it's a really big opportunity, I think, in terms of not just building psychological safety, but building people's digital capability, and then that's going to massively impact on productivity.
Absolutely. There's a couple of things that I wanted to share, and one of those was around stories or real cases that I'm hearing. So I'm over here in the West, you're over the East. Over the West, there's been quite a focus on psychological safety, I'd say, over the last 18 months. So I think, we've got different kind of legislation in different parts in different states across Australia. So I think in WA there's been a lot more focus on these factors, and we've had a few clients that we've worked with that have actually settled outside of court for historical breaches of psychological safety and psychosocial risk factors.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so we know that people are starting to wake up to the fact that, I experienced unmanaged trauma, years ago, and now I realize, it's still affecting me. So businesses are starting, organizations are going, all right, what does this actually mean? How do we actually put this in place? What do we have to be measuring and showing that we're psychologically safe all the time? And the reality is, you're not going to be psychologically safe all the time. So, a team measure in the morning and then, have high psych safety, and then something happens that week, and then later in the week, they measure as lower. It peaks and troughs depending on what's happening in the environment. That's why, when we do yearly surveys or even, quarterly pulse checks, a lot can happen between those times. And so, it's important to just identify, okay, what's happening.
Yeah.
All right. We've got a question coming up, and please, if there's other questions that are that listeners have, watchers, I don't know what to say, please pop them on the comments box. So, Kathy, this one's for you.
Okay, this is a very interesting one. Has there ever been a time when someone knows they should have spoken up in an unsafe environment and they didn't? What did you advise? I actually am coaching someone, and I'm coaching. Oh, actually, I won't say that. I'm coaching them at the moment, who last year was not speaking up when they were experiencing a lot of very toxic workplace behaviour, and things like someone snapping their fingers. Can you get me a tea, love? Like, that kind of, really happening in 2024. And one of the things I asked her was, what stops you from speaking up in that moment? And of course, it's fear. We all fear being rejected, or we fear conflict. And, when we feel those negative emotions, we just have to start to notice, what's the unmet need I need to, satisfy here. And so by her recognizing that she wants to be liked by everyone, and that she's, but also her sense that, they're an executive director, and I'm, not at that level. They weren't recognizing that there was lots of ways that they could create awareness that with that other person, that this was inappropriate behavior, but still keep the conversation safe. And, So I gave her a couple of questions. And the first question I gave her to ask that person, which she did the following week, was, let's call them Mary. Mary, I'm not sure if you're aware of the impact of how you spoke to me last week. That wasn't exactly it, but it was something like that.
Yeah.
And this person had no idea how upset my client was. And I think that's it sometimes, that we assume that people must know that behavior is bad. And hence the last 12 months when I've been working, I've watched this girl kind of go from a doormat to a powerhouse, and she is doing great stuff now because she's got very clear boundaries. She actually said, I get on great with Mary now. I can't believe it. So it's, it's important that people don't, there's this whole myth that something outside of me needs to change for me to be happy, when in actual fact, if we can learn how to have that conversation more effectively, then we can actually make, we're not waiting for Mary to change. We're not waiting for Mary to be nice. We're actually taking control and using our own capacity to ask better questions to get better relationships.
Yeah, great. I love that. I think, another objection I've heard in the past is, people are going to start using this new legislation as a way of, trying to pinpoint people, and kind of go, oh, no, that hurts my psychological safety and things like that. And, my response to that is, my view is that that's very rare. Right. There are some people that, a very small percentage that might be deviant and use that against other people and but for the most part, and I think you would agree, most time when people actually go find their voice and find the skills and the ability and change that mindset that says, don't say anything, to it's okay for me to say this. That it has a beautiful impact and everyone wins.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we talked about yesterday, Abby, we need to focus on making things go right. And sometimes it takes things going wrong for us to actually start to recognize. But no one goes to work deliberately, I don't think. And in my experience coaching many, many people, and even I, not so much now, but I used to always get asked to coach the problematic person. And, you can see a dramatic improvement in their behavior when they get that self-awareness. So, the self-awareness piece, we cannot assume that people know how to make other people feel psychologically safe.
So you've used the word self-awareness, emotional intelligence. We talked about performance. In my view, all of those words are correlated with psychological safety. Yeah.
Yes.
So they are the same. They are kind of the same thing. When I feel safe, I speak up. When I, am able to express my needs and wants, that's me being emotional intelligent. When I'm able to kind of understand what other people are coming from and being open to feedback, that's emotional intelligence. When that's present within a team, then it's great. We're able to perform better. All right. So if
one last point. We need to be very intentional ourselves on our capacity to focus on how am I going to create trust with the people around me today. That's what I thought to be left with.
Yeah, but just very quickly, if we can crunch this question into 1 minute. Do you ever come across leaders who are hesitant to undertake psychological safety programs because they're afraid of what might be revealed?
All the time. But you know what? Once we have rapport with them, when they trust that we're not there for a witch hunt, when they trust that we're there for everybody's benefit, that goes away very quickly. It's normal for us all to fear change.
Absolutely. And I think, the way that we've kind of designed our program as well is that it doesn't identify people like, oh, that person's really bad. It's group. It's you're able to see the results in the group level. So 50% of us are feeling it's unsafe to raise new ideas and concerns. Yes, some people might go, I don't want to. I fear what might come out of it. But in actual fact, it's a beautiful clearing growth experience for a team, which is why I love it so much.
Me too. I'm really grateful. And I just love coaching with the tool because every session's different and every session's rich.
Yes, agreed. Look, thank you so much for joining me today, Kathy. I'm assuming you're very, very open to people reaching out to you if they've got any questions, and
absolutely.
In coaching or using the indicator that you use as well. Likewise, if anyone has any questions on how do you measure psych safety and psychosocial risk, and about the program in itself, I'd be happy to answer any questions too. So thank you very much. And as always, lovely to chat with you, Kathy.
Absolutely great to chat with you too, Abby.
See ya.
Bye.